Excellent, thank you. So thank you for the comments so far. Steve, thank you. Transitioning from mentoring to coaching. Yes, I know exactly what you mean, Steve. Yeah, because mentoring conversations again can be a bit directive, perhaps not overly directive, but perhaps more directive than you would like. And then that transition to coaching, so it's more pull, less push. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Steve. Beata, to delegate tasks and trust employees to handle them. Yeah, thanks, Beata. That's really useful. Delegate tasks and trust employees to handle them. Yes, well, I'll talk through a model that will hopefully give you some insights into do that. One of our future sessions will be specifically on delegation. I think it's 2 or 3 sessions out because I've got a schedule that I follow. So there is one specifically about delegation, Beata, but you'll get some of those insights today. But if you want to know specifically about delegation, we've got a future session where we'll cover that as well. Brilliant. Okay, thanks everybody. That's really good. So we've got some really excellent kind of insights around what you're trying to get from today's session. So we are at 6 minutes past. Let's make a start, and I will keep an eye on the waiting room. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen. If you can someone can just give me a quick thumbs up to let me know you can see what I can see. Yeah, great. Thank you, Joost. That's super. And so let's talk about today's session. Before we get into that, those of you who are regulars will remember this principle, but today is about this next kind of 50 minutes or so that we've got left. This is about thinking time, about quality thinking time. In our businesses, in leadership roles, we tend to be full on. You know, the pace is high. You're always doing something, and this is an opportunity to kind of step off the treadmill, as it were, and give yourself some clarity around what you want to do and think hopefully more clearly about your plans going forward. That's the idea of this session. And what we're going to cover today, we'll look at how to stop ourselves from micromanaging. Some of that is about awareness, and start to think about how do we transition to coaching for higher performance of our teams. And what we'll look at is why people micromanage and the experiences of micromanagement, the impact of micromanagement. Then we'll talk about how do we transition and change our approach. And then we'll talk about some principles of coaching. And hopefully those 3 aspects of today's session are really going to help you to start to think for yourself about that migration from overly directive management to coaching your teams.
Justin, just making sure we're seeing your desktop. I'm not sure we're seeing the actual presentation if you're sharing a presentation yet.
Thank you, Joost. Am I sharing the wrong? I am sharing the wrong screen. Thank you, Joost.
It's a good desktop, though. I like it.
What you were saying. Thank you, Simon. What you were seeing was my vision board. That's my vision board. It's my backdrop on my laptop, just so that it kind of keeps me focused on what I'm trying to achieve kind of long term going forward. Yeah, thank you. I hope you like it. I'm a big fan of kind of just keeping what I'm aiming for front and center. Okay, can you now see the Steve Jobs slide?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Joost. I appreciate you stepping in. Otherwise, it could have been a boring session for most of you. Not the first time I've made that sort of mistake, so apologies, everybody. But I'm a big fan of Steve Jobs, right? So I'm sure you've seen this quote before, and it's so relevant to us. I think it becomes more and more relevant the longer you're in business, right? It doesn't make sense for us to hire smart people and then tell them what to do and be overly directive. We hire smart people so that they can start to learn and tell us what to do. We hire them for their input, their ideas. And, when you read the stories about Steve Jobs, one of the things he was really good at was just saying, this is what we're trying to achieve. Go figure it out, right? And it was no more directive than that. Like when he was developing the iPhone, he said, "I just want a single button, nothing else, one button." And this thing was like, one button, just a single button on the screen, nothing else. And he didn't give them any more direction than that, and they figured it out. And ultimately, now they've gone to no buttons. There's no buttons on the front of the screen. So it's really interesting the way that more inspiring leaders, coaching type leaders, people who have a natural affinity for coaching, are familiar with this principle around set direction and then let the teams figure it out. That's one of the things that we really need to start to learn for ourselves. But let's look at why people micromanage. So I've got some kind of this. There's quite a bit of research on this. One of the big things, and I think Claire said it, if you're a high performer in your role, as functional role, and then as a leader, you know how to do this, right? So because you know how to do it, you kind of want people to do it your way. And also because high performers are exactly that. We're normally, if you look at normal distribution curve, high performers are in the top 20%. And by default, that means 80% of the organization will not be performing at the same level as you. That's why you normally why you got into leadership. And so when you see that your team aren't operating the same way as you, there's this control gap that happens where we want a greater sense of control over people. And I'm not preaching here. I've been through this myself multiple times and found myself in this trap. The other piece that's really interesting is about standards. So as high performers, we tend to have higher standards. So we expect people to meet our standards, whether that's, quality of the work that they're doing or speed of the work they're doing. But we tend to think and have this intention that people can keep up with us. And that's not always the case. The other thing is around trust. So over time, if you've got people in your team that perhaps aren't performing and you don't trust them to do it properly, you apply greater scrutiny. So you get closer to them, start to manage them, in a way that is more directive and just a bit, perhaps a little bit more constraining on their part and yours as a leader, right? This was interesting from Beati. I'm not sure. I don't know how to delegate. So how do we delegate effectively? And delegation is it's a series of principles. It's something, and there's an approach that we follow. As I say, we'll do it in a future workshop. But there's a way to delegate that's effective, and there's a way. I love the phrase "delegate, don't abdicate." And so we have to go through a process to delegate. It's not just show someone how to do it and let them get on with it. I know I talked about the Steve Jobs quote, but that's in the context of having highly capable people who are already, high performing in their own right. And then finally, people, they don't know what else to do. As leaders, in my first couple of leadership assignments, I was overly directive and I didn't know what else to do. I hadn't been given the tools to coach straight away. So I had to learn that over time. And so I was just, all over people like a rash, not intentionally. It's because I thought that was what needed to happen. But the impact of micromanagement, so that's why it happens. And then there's what happens as a result. Well, I've certainly noticed this, having been on the receiving end of it myself. I've worked for a couple of managers who were very, very close to the business, very close to my part of the business, and micromanaged or tried to micromanage and get involved in everything, try and, sense check and double check and second guess everything that you're doing. It can be really stifling. And that increases stress, right? You just feel a higher level of stress. You find that you get greater dependency. People then start to come to you for simple things, simple decisions that actually if you're thinking to yourself, you could have done that yourself, you could have decided that yourself, that's normally a sense of dependency on the manager or the leader. And then, of course, we get lower morale. People start to tune out. They just feel a little less energized at work. And that increases, that impacts engagement. So we get a decrease in engagement from people that are kind of closely scrutinized and managed. That then, of course, leads to performance. We find that you get less ideas and innovation coming out. You're going to get less suggestions from people who are always dependent on the leader for ideas. And of course, greater risk of burnout, and not just for the teams, but actually for the leader or the manager. If you're trying to be all things to all people, it's you kind of end up getting a bit of a hiding for nothing. You're on a road to nowhere that just will consume. I think about to-do lists and work as being a never-ending list of tasks, right? You never get to the end of your to-do list, and it's like a vacuum. It will take all the time and energy you give. And at some point, if we don't learn to pivot and learn to coach people, learn to devolve responsibility and delegate more effectively, we do risk burnout. And I've been very close myself in the past. And of course, from a retention perspective, we get higher team turnover. There's that old adage, I'm sure you've heard it, that people join companies but they leave managers. And it's really true. I've made decisions in the past. I'm sure you've had experience of it. I've made decisions in the past based on the person that's managing me. Do you stay or do you go? And very often it is down to the relationship with that person that's leading you. And then I ran a LinkedIn poll recently on micromanagement. Some really interesting comments on it. So a lot of votes, a lot of comments. So this is people's experience. Have you ever worked for a micromanager? What was your experience of it? So here's some of the comments. I just very quickly gave up, because why did I need to bother making much effort or using my brain and initiative? So it's a classic example, right? I hated every minute and didn't stay there very long as a result. Not only was it micromanagement, it was chaotic micromanagement-ish. So this is, and I've seen this myself, where managers who are too close, trying to have too much control over lots of different people, tend to be a bit chaotic. They're all over the place, got so much going on that they are literally pivoting from one task to the next, and it feels chaotic. It doesn't feel like there's structure or a clear direction. More comments. So these are all different comments from different people. Many years ago, I was micromanaged and absolutely hated it. In fact, all of our team was micromanaged and it was non-productive. Someone else saying, I have, but I blame the company for providing no formal management or leadership training. Because that's interesting, saying, actually, perhaps it's not the manager's fault. Perhaps it's the company's fault for expecting the manager to be able to manage or lead without any formal training or development. And then finally, I hated being micromanaged. What's the point of hiring someone to do a job and then sit on their shoulder all day? Very much aligned with the Steve Jobs quote, right? Why hire great people and tell them what to do? We hire great people so that they can start to tell us, bring us their ideas and tell us how to improve. That's the idea, right? But I'd love to hear from you, your experiences then. What do you think? What's your experience of micromanagement? You can either, if you'd like to join me on camera and share, you can do that, or you can put it in the chat box. Entirely up to you. But I'd love to hear your experiences. What have you experienced? Either, whether it's micromanagement or working for someone that's perhaps a bit overly directive, or a bit perhaps consuming. What's been your experience?
When I'll kick off. When I actually started in management, my first management role, so I was a manager being managed.
Yeah,
I was really micromanaged, and I really needed it.
Okay. So hold on. So you've got an alternative view, Simon. You were micromanagement, but you needed to be micromanaged.
Exactly. It was my first management role. I knew very little. I'd been through training, but had no practical experience.
Yeah.
And he was quite, I'm almost going to say dictatorial, but he knew what needed to be done, and he told me what to do. To a point where I was on my own and I could go and do it myself.
Yeah.
So I'd been through most of the scenarios that would happen. I'm in sales, but so it's sales management.
Yeah.
But I found his very hands-on approach invaluable at first.
Yeah, good. And when did the transition occur between that being useful and then him either backing off or you thinking, I'm okay now? What was had
a horrible feeling you might ask me that. I guess it would be a bit of both. I think it'd be a bit of me needing to go to him for less.
Yeah.
I guess. The growth and expansion of the team, meaning he probably had less time to focus on me, and maybe I've never asked him, but maybe some sort of because he was a good leader, maybe some sort of realization in himself that I was all right to carry on doing what I was doing.
Yeah, that's good. So you had a positive experience of it, Simon?
Yeah, to a point. I mean, if I think back, there's probably a slight bit of frustration where I'm ready to let go of the side of the swimming baths before he thinks I am,
Yes.
So there's probably a little bit of frustration out of that, but it was managed. It was managed properly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Very good. Any other experiences of micromanagement? Thanks for sharing that, Simon. That's really useful. Because I like the idea that actually it can be useful. Directive management can be useful in the right situation at the right stage of your career, or
and for I think for a period of time as well.
Yeah.
When it becomes habitual, it's
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, completely agree. It's a really interesting useful way of looking at it. Because sometimes we have to be careful as leaders that we don't, I use that term abdicate, delegate, not abdicate, because that can be a problem as well, where we think we can just tell someone what to do and then, right, it's no longer mine and I'm off. Actually, people might need some of that direction and then a check-in. and then okay, let's do a little bit of recalibration and another check-in, recalibrate, and everybody's different, and they're going to need different things depending on their experience. So yeah, it's a great example. Thanks, Simon. Useful, really useful.
Can I say something?
Hi, Pretty. Yes, please do.
Hi, Justin.
Hiya.
So I have had experiences of both sides of that. One of my principals, when I was quite young, he had a major heart attack. So they had to have, I was working there, so the staff and his wife wanted me to take over and take care of the business. So I started to help. And yes, I was young and I was micromanaged. At that point, I just thought that they're telling me what to do, and I was doing it. And later on, I realized that actually they helped me to step up quite a bit. And it was in their difficult time that I kind of took over. I then left the job because it was small and I wanted more. So I went to another place where, because I had done this, they didn't like it. And so they were making it very difficult, micromanaging me where I knew stuff already. And that would help them because they were far behind. And in the end, I had to leave the job because they were making it so difficult for me to grow or contribute. And at a practice meeting, I found that they stopped inviting me.
Oh, wow. So you saw both spectrums, Pretty. So you were managed quite closely, but it helped you to step into like that principal leadership role. And then when you went somewhere else, you had those skills, but you were suppressed and constrained through micromanage because they didn't recognize your ability.
Yes.
Wow. Interesting. So yeah.
That kind of was difficult. It slowed me down a little because I felt I should play small because they were making like a little bit of bullying was going on. And in the end, once I left the job, it was okay, but it was a very difficult time. So I think it's important, one, to see where you're going. And if you're being micromanaged, it's not a bad thing, but there comes a point where that person develops their own confidence to do more. Then you have to allow them to do more. Work in a team, not just tell them what to do, because neither the person or the business will grow.
No, totally agree, Pretty. And it's similar to Simon's point, isn't it? That it's about time. It's all right for a certain period of time, and once people have the skills and the experience, actually that's the time to let go and let them thrive. And don't keep that directive, overly micromanaging approach going. And thanks for sharing your experience as well, Pretty. That's really useful. And this is important for us as leaders, because our experience then can inform how we lead our team, so that we don't fall into this trap ourselves. And we don't want to be overly scrutinizing people. We don't want to be leaving them if they need support either. So it's that delicate balance, isn't it? And it's really important. And Beata says in the chat, I have attempted micromanagement, but it resulted in increased stress for both myself and the employee. This approach was ineffective, as it led to the employee making even more mistakes. That's interesting, isn't it? And we'll talk a little bit about why that might happen next. So thanks for sharing your experiences. That's really useful. Let me make sure I'll share my screen again. I'll make sure I share the right one this time. So you should be able to see my screen now. I just want to talk about this model called the performance curve. I'm sure you've seen this, right? But I'll just share this with you because it's really interesting. When we think about performance and purpose, so on this chart, you think the y-axis is performance and purpose, high performance and purpose at the top, low purpose and performance at the bottom. And then on the x-axis, we think about stress and the pressure that's applied to people, okay? And very low pressure or low stress on the left, high pressure, high stress on the right. And what happens if you think about this as a performance curve, right? Low pressure and low performance and purpose, people tend to be in this kind of bored state where they're not really giving their all. They're just going through the motions. And then as stress or pressure is increased, they get through this position where they go to calm, through to this, what we call eustress zone. Now, eustress is positive stress. It's where I'm under pressure, but I'm enjoying it because I have high purpose. I'm a high performer. I know what I'm doing and I'm capable, right? And that hits this eustress kind of period. And then if we get too much pressure, or if we start to find that we're not enjoying our role, or it's not purposeful, or we're perhaps slightly out of our comfort zone, then it's not very difficult for people to tip over into what we call distress. So there's a difference. Eustress is good stress. It's positive. It engages us. It creates energy. Distress is the opposite. It starts to pull performance down. And can tip over into anxiety for people, where actually performance gets even worse. So you see performance is low at the start and tails off at the end as well. And stress, from what you've experienced, stress actually can suppress people's performance. So it can start them to, it can affect the blood circulation in the mind. And what happens is there's this phenomenon that happens where the blood is pulled to they call it the amygdala, which is like the reptilian part of the brain, right? And the blood supply from the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that thinks and is cognitive, that actually it draws blood away from the prefrontal cortex. So actually it does suppress performance. It makes people less able to think clearly. It can be really damaging to people over the short to mid-term. And what we want to do really is help people to get to this point where there's sufficient amount of stress and pressure. They know what they're doing. And you've kind of explained this in your kind of feedback around your experiences of management yourselves, and get them into this zone of optimal performance. And really, as leaders, on the left-hand side of this chart, if we are leaving people to their own devices too much, if we're more absent than we should be, people are going to be bored, right? If we micromanage or we're too directive for too long, people are going to experience distress and anxiety. And coaching really does give us this opportunity to pull people into this zone of optimal performance, where they experience eustress, they have the tools they need, and we can really help them to lift their own performance and potential for the future. So I'll talk a bit about this model, a bit about what coaching is, and then we'll go to some breakout discussions. But I'm a fan of thinking about things in systems. So think about a system, think about the steps that you take. And where we think about coaching versus micromanagement, it really is in this stage, coach for change. But there's a lot goes on before that. And as leaders, we should be thinking about a number of things. I'll just walk through this model quickly so you can start to think about joining up the dots. But first and foremost, we should be thinking about building trust, having positive relationships, making sure that people feel safe in our presence, that we've got a culture within our team and our business where people can thrive, right? So as leaders, it's our job to create that. That's our responsibility. Once we've set that culture, then it's about making sure that we're clear on where the business is going, and we have a plan and we can articulate it. So people understand I'm part of something bigger. We're trying to achieve these goals as a business, and I'm a component of achieving those goals. Then once we have the plan in place and we've communicated it, then it's about making sure for each person that's working with us, we've got some kind of agreement about how we're going to operate together. And I call it a contract. We contract with people. It's from the contracting principle, Steve will know this very well, is from coaching. So executive coaching, one of the first principles that we teach or that we learn is to contract with clients so that we've got an agreement about how we'll work together. And it's a really powerful first step, because it gives you and the other person clarity over what to expect with each other. And then once you've got a contract in place, what we need to do then is start to talk about objectives and goals. So what are the specific expectations that person has and will meet? And how do we agree those going forward so that we can regularly check in? This is the piece where if we get the first couple of stages right, we agree standards and how we'll work together, we agree what your clear expectations are and what high performance looks like and what the tasks are that make that up. actually, if you and your team or individual that you're working with have clarity over that, it gives you much more confidence to start to step back, because you and they have documented it and it's clear. So once objectives and goals are clear, then it's about letting people do what they do best. Let them take action and create some space for us to be observing them doing what they do. And from that point of observation, we will create opportunities to coach them to change. And that is where coaching comes in. But if we miss these first three steps, the contracting, the objectives and goals, the opportunity for them to act and us to observe without jumping in and rescuing them all the time, then we can coach really effectively. And I think that's the piece that, for me in my career early on, that's what I was missing. I was missing the setting of standards or the agreeing of standards, missing the objectives and goals, and perhaps missing the opportunity to let people do what they do and observe from a distance, because that creates this opportunity to coach for change. So that's the process. And then the final piece is the H is heroes in the making. That's about development planning, growing people, spending time talking about their future, where they want to be, how you can help them get there. And that's really, really useful. As leaders, we've got this opportunity to really start to get people to think bigger and think differently. So let's talk a bit about coaching, then I'm going to open it up to some discussion. So you can only coach people really in an effective way by questioning, learning to listen really carefully, and creating some space for them to think, so that thinking time is cognitive processing, where they start to think about their own improvement. And it comes from the inside out. It comes from that person, not from you. And when we think about the coaching stage in our model, leadership model, it's really important. This is probably one of the most important stages in the model. And it's about slowing down, opening up, and really seeking to understand what that person's thinking. Because everything we need to know to get the best from them is in their mind, right? They know how to get the best from themselves. The only way for us to get it out is to question and listen and really tease it out so that it comes from them, not directively from us, especially once all of the other components are in place, clear expectations, people know what they're doing. We're creating some clarity around what's expected and in terms of standards, boundaries, that kind of thing. Once that's in place, actually coaching is really effective. So what is coaching? Coaching is about helping to build confidence in people and to trust them to do what they need to do. It's about, I always think about support and challenge as being two sides of the same coin, right? We want to support people, but if we're overly supportive and we're not challenging, actually people don't progress. If we're overly challenging without support, people will tip into anxiety, right? So we have to think about those two things as being tied together, challenge and support. I talked about questioning, listening, silence, and space. It's also about starting to get people to think about solutions and outcomes. Start to think about, what am I trying to achieve? What's the outcome we're aiming for? How do I focus on that rather than just the task that I'm completing? It's about pulling ideas from people, not pushing. And there are times when people do need some guidance. And I'm a fan of signposting. So have you thought about this? Then back into coaching. Or have you thought about these resources that could be helpful? Then back into coaching. So we're not telling people, we're saying, have you thought about this? And then we coach. Have you thought about that? And then we coach. And it's about being reflective and trying to shift perspectives for people. Because as I said at the start, everyone on this call is a high performer. You're naturally a high performer. If you're in a leadership position, you think differently. You're in the top 20%. And very often the way that we think is not the way that other people think. So when we're coaching people, a big part of what we're doing is shifting perspectives, getting people to think differently, because today they're not thinking like you think, I guarantee it, and you'll have experienced that yourselves. And then another part of coaching is about energizing people. It's about creating the right positivity. It's about building their self-belief so that they start to think about more possibilities for themselves. And once we've got that, we also want to create some focus and some clarity around what they're really going to prioritize as part of their kind of actions going forward. And then finally, we think about personal responsibility and accountability, so that it no longer sits with us as the leader to be responsible for that person's performance. It's their performance. They are responsible and accountable for it. So we build that in through the coaching conversations. And then finally, gaining commitment to change and act alongside that change. So commitment to make key changes and for them to then follow through on those changes, because that's really important. And of course, coaching is not a one-time thing. We don't just, coach somebody and they're changed. Actually, for us and for them, it's ongoing and it's continuous. And it's an approach that we learn to take that becomes much more effective for us as leaders in growing our teams and helping us to create some space for ourselves, because we're not having to jump in and pick up all the different tasks. So I'm going to kind of pause there on the sharing of content for today, and give you an opportunity just to discuss this with each other in a couple of breakout rooms. And I'm interested to hear, I guess, interested to let you just share from your own experience and from today's session so far, what you've picked up, what you perhaps might need to change and adjust going forward, and then we'll regroup. We'll probably we'll do about 12 minutes on this. 10's probably not enough. 15 might be pushing for time. So we'll go for 12 minutes. And then if you could just nominate someone from your group to feedback, that would be great. I'm just going to create a couple of random rooms. So you'll be with different people. Hopefully it's useful. Just introduce yourselves, have a conversation, and I'll see you back here in about 12 minutes. Enjoy your conversations this morning, everybody. Right, well, we're all back. Thank you all so much. I hope you enjoyed your conversations. Pretty was just saying that it's useful that you don't often get different leaders from different businesses in different situations. So hopefully you've found that as an opportunity today to share some of your experience, learn from other people, and to start to try and think about, what are the changes that you might want to make as you go forward in your leadership role. So let's hear, if you're okay, let's take some feedback from your groups about kind of themes of your discussions. Why don't we start with group one, which was Beata, Claire, and Pretty. I think Dorcas was there, she's dropped off. So Claire, Beata, and Pretty, who'd like to share back from your group?
Okay, so I'm happy to speak.
Thanks, Pretty.
So the general consensus was that coaching is better, although micromanagement initially is important, because if the person hasn't been in that role, and the practical situation for every business is different, the initial hand-holding is important, so that they don't feel lost or abandoned, and you get more out of it. Sharing goals or checking in sometimes, just to make sure that they feel comfortable to come and ask you if there is something that they are not sure about, confused. It's all very well to request somebody to do something differently, but until that person actually understands and changes, you've got to just be patient, and sometimes they may not step up. This situation is a bit difficult if we are working from home and the other people are in their own environment, and you generally, if you're in an office, you might look at them or know from figures that are shared within a a computer or data input as it comes. People do check, I know, with sales every lunchtime and then in the evening. If you don't see the person, then you're more likely to go and check in on them because you can't see them. But you have to kind of step back and not do that too much, because then that person will become conscious and then stress and anxiety come in. But there are other ways. I think when on a previous one, if it's about sharing a goal and then celebration and all that has to play a part in it, so that there's some fun and what's in it for them as well. Not just what's in it for us.
It's a good point as well, Pretty, about remote working. More and more people are working from home now, so you've got there's a different way to lead and manage teams. You have to be careful not to be absent, but also not to be too directive. And it is always a balance. It depends on that person's capability, I think very often it depends on how clearly we've agreed and set objectives. How clear are they on what's expected? How clear are we on what we're expecting? And then there's a process of calibration you can do through coaching. Sometimes, as you say, in the early stages, you might have to be really close to people because they need that support and they want it and they appreciate it. And then we go through this transition towards, being able to step back, giving people the space to really find their flow and allow them to perform at the right level. Yeah, very good. Very good. Thank you, Pretty. Second group was Joost, Simon, Steve, and Joe. Who'd like to share back from your discussion?
We ran out of time we ran out of time to distribute the task because we're cut off. But that's okay. No worries whatsoever. We can have a start and everybody can just fill in. I think I scribbled down some notes there, so we can just run through it.
Great.
I think what we came to, if we talk about coaching or not micromanaging, is Simon mentioned that it's always hard to make sure you have enough time to listen to what people are saying. The task throughout the day might sort of rush you through it, and like what Joe said based on one of the previous ones, like you're already thinking about the next thing while someone is talking. What is the end objective, but also what I'm going to answer. Maybe you lose the actual essence of what's being told in that, and then that's the challenge in order to make sure that you actually can do that. And that's what Steve mentioned, that if you actually take the time to listen and you get to the right questions, you get to the answers quicker, and it might actually be more efficient in the long run, or time efficient in the long run, than if you would just try to rush through it and get through it instead of just taking a little bit more time. And of course, everybody has different work environments, with only being online or being face-to-face, and that might change certain things as well, whereas a face-to-face one-on-one might make that a little bit easier. And then we came across something that I had mentioned, where I find the challenge is, when do you step away a little bit more and give someone space to actually do everything themselves? As Percy said earlier, sometimes in the beginning you need to be a little bit more on top of things, maybe not necessarily micromanage, but at least be aware of what's going on and that everything is there. When do you step away? And then Simon mentioned the situational leadership model as well, which you can utilize for that too, which for some of us was new, others had heard of it before. So that could be something interesting in regards to coaching, to sort of guide yourself, depending on how your team is set up, on how to approach things.
Great summary, Joost. I think that's spot on. I think we also were just reflecting on what you said, though, Justin, as well, being clear. I think one of the big problems is actually being clear about the goal itself, and whether that's part of a challenge of onboarding people, or just making assumptions that we all know, what the objectives are, which I think was as part of one of your diagrams about the plan at the top.
Yeah.
The initial connection and planning. You'd hope that would come out in the contract in an agreement, but I think that's critical.
Yeah, agreed, Steve. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the good summary, Joost. Yeah, excellent. And you're right, Steve. That I think I see leadership as a process, right? It's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing, continuous series of conversations. It's about refinement and recalibration. And I think, we know that, but sometimes we forget that, and we just go into, have you done this yet? Have you done that yet? Where are you with this? Where are you with that? And it becomes, even though we think it's coaching, it's actually it's scrutiny. And really what we want to try and move to are those more coaching-based situations. How are you getting on? Talk to me about your objectives. How are you feeling about things? How do you think you're performing? So that people then start to, the responsibility shifts from us always having to check in with people to them actually feeling like they're in control of their own performance and objectives. And, there are times when people drift off track and we have to help them to get clarity. But most of the time, if we can get, I think your point's really well made. If we can get that plan and those objectives in place, actually everything flows much more easily from there. So almost spending some time up front getting that work done is really valuable, really valuable. Great conversations this morning, everybody. Thank you so much. We're at 5 to the hour, so I'm gonna wrap up. One quick thing, I'm just going to put in the chat. If I can find it, there's the chat box. If you would like a conversation, I'm just going to put my link to my calendar in the chat. I mean, obviously, this is what I do for a living, right? So I run programs around leadership and sales training. We do all sorts of stuff. What I've found is that there's no quick fix, right? So we don't do one session and then you're fixed. Actually, it's a series of workshops. It's a series of conversations with a community of leaders, and we do that. We map out accountability partners. We do all sorts of things. So if any of that interests you, then feel free to contact me. But I've also got this calendar link if you want a one-to-one conversation. If there's anything specific that's on your mind and you think, you know what, I think a bit of coaching for yourself might be useful, then feel free to book 45 minutes in my diary. Okay, let's wrap up. Joe's got a hand up though. Joe, thank you. How can I help?
Thank you. Just to say thank you, Justin. I'm far away from being a complete leader, but thank you for, guiding me, coaching me along the journey. Can I do a terrible plug?
Go on, Joe, do a terrible plug.
I've got my episode of the Eastman Dental podcast is coming out on Monday. So if you Google Eastman Dental podcast, I guess, episode 5.
Eastman Dental podcast, episode 5, Joe Dawson. Okay, Joe.
I'd be interested to hear any feedback.
Yeah, will you drop me a link to it, Joe, and I'll put it in the email that I follow up that I send out to everybody afterwards. Drop me a link, and I'll include Joe's podcast episode and I promise comes out Monday, Joe.
Yep, apparently.
I promise I'll listen to it next week as well. I'll tell you what, I'll listen to it a couple of times, so it gives you a couple of plays. How about that?
Wonderful, hero. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for the feedback, Joe. Thank you, everybody, for investing time this morning. Hope you found it useful.
Thank you.
And look forward to seeing you in a future session. Thanks. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you, Justin. Cheers, guys. See you. Bye.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.